Laudetur Jesus Christus. Praised be Jesus Christ. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of Vatican Media, Vatican Radio, and all my colleagues here at the Vatican Dicastery for Communication. I'm Sean Patrick Lovett. It's my privilege to provide the commentary for this live broadcast of Pope Francis' visit to the southern Italian city of Bari. The Holy Father is there to address a conference entitled Mediterranean Frontier of Peace. It's a conference that's seen the participation over the last few days of some 60 Catholic bishops from 19 nations bordering the Mediterranean. The Holy Father will be addressing the conference shortly and then later this morning celebrating Holy Mass here in the city of Bari. On whatever platform, medium or device you may be following this event, please know we're delighted you could join us. We do especially welcome our friends of Salt and Light TV, EWTN TV, Shalom World TV, and Catholic TV, as well as all of you listening on local radio stations around the world. This broadcast is also available to you right now on our Vatican Media audio app and Vatican News portal, which you can access at www.vaticannews.va. That's Vatican News with two N's.va for Vatican. If you're able to follow the visuals of this event, then you will see the Holy Father has literally just arrived. He is entering the cathedral at this moment, and you will see that gathered there to greet him are these bishops, around 60 of them, from the 19 nations bordering the Mediterranean Sea. The event has been organized by the Italian Bishops' Conference, and the idea is that it focuses on key issues facing the region. The works of the conference began last Wednesday when participants gathered for the opening ceremony. On Thursday, they discussed the topic, delivering the faith to future generations. And Friday's theme was the relationship between church and society, mobility, citizenship, religious freedom, and inequality. Both days included morning round table discussions and assembly discussions in the afternoon. On Saturday, yesterday, an assembly was held for general conclusions that will be condensed into a final document. And in a few moments, we will hear Pope Francis address the meeting as he also receives that document. Among the topics, of course, migration, given the situation of the Mediterranean and the numbers of people trying to enter Europe, either from the Middle East or North Africa, many of them trafficked, exploited, caught in inadequate policies for reception and integration. And another important topic, the dwindling Christian communities in some Middle Eastern countries impacted by the rise of the so-called Islamic states. But let's listen closely now. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, should be beginning in just a few moments. He's taken his place behind a table here, draped in green cloth, surrounded by cardinals and brother bishops. But of course, we listen to the...
Con profonda riconoscenza, le porgo il saluto che si affacciano sulle sponde del Mediterraneo e dei popoli che essi rappresentano.
Days of encounter and reflection, of kinship and sharing. The initiative draws on ancient and deep roots, says Cardinal Bassetti. It embodies the prophetic vision of Giorgio La Pira. Giorgio La Pira was an Italian politician, twice mayor of Florence. He died in 1977, and he participated in writing the Italian constitution. Giorgio La Pira, says the cardinal, since the late 1950s, inspired what he called the Mediterranean dialogues and anticipated the ecumenical spirit that would blow with great force in the Second Vatican Council. According to Giorgio La Pira, the peoples of the countries lining the Mediterranean, with their common roots in Abraham share a vision of life and humanity that, despite profound differences, is open to the values of transcendence.
Con questo incontro abbiamo iniziato, perché io ho detto si è fatta la luce. Anche Dio quando creò l'universo, il primo giorno creò la luce. Noi siamo
From this comes the common vision not only of the sacredness of every human life, but also its intangibility. With this meeting, says the Cardinal, we've begun to put this vision into practice, listening
e cercando i segni dei tempi nelle parole e nella testimonianza
Listening to the
dalla
Lord,
presenza e dalla storia di ciascuno
seeking
di noi.
the signs of the times
Ne sono parte
in the
le
words and
ricchezze
witness
delle
offered by
molteplici
the presence and history of each one of us.
spirituali, ecclesiologiche, ricchezze che mentre ci distinguono contribuiscono a rendere viva e preziosa
Part of this presence and history, he says, are the riches of the many liturgical, spiritual, and ecclesiological traditions. Riches that, while distinguishing us, contribute to making the experience of communion alive and precious. We've begun an important process, he says, using the synodal method which characterized our work. It marks the beginning of this process, which requires from each one a new willingness to be involved with our hearts open. And this is what we now intend to offer you, together with a summary of what emerged from our assembly, so that by your magisterium you may enlighten us, provoke us, and accompany us. Thank you again, Your Holiness. Know that you can count on our affection and our commitment. Those were the words of welcome, the opening address by the President of the Italian Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Gualtiero Bassetti.
Santo Padre, la saluto cordialmente e ringrazio tutti coloro che hanno dato il loro contributo nell'organizzazione di questo incontro, specialmente la Conferenza Episcopale Italiana. Per noi vescovi provenienti da paesi dove i cattolici sono minoranza, questo convenire è un segno visibile dell'attenzione.
We're listening now to the voice of Cardinal Vinko Puljić. He's the Archbishop of Sarajevo, and he's president of the Bishops' Conference of Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Nell'Eucaristia in questa città così ricca di storia.
Holy Father, he says, I cordially greet you and I thank all those who have contributed to organizing this meeting, especially the Italian Bishops' Conference. For us bishops, coming from countries where Catholics are a minority, this coming together is a visible sign of attention and fraternity among the churches of the Mediterranean. Today we're happy to join you in celebrating the Eucharist in this city, which is so rich in history, and in a region, the southern Italian region of Puglia, where Cardinal Puljić says he also finds his personal roots.
Nel Mediterraneo nord-orientale, alla fine del XX secolo, abbiamo vissuto in misura maggiore o minore
Holy Father, he says, I'm pleased to inform you that in our work we've looked for ways to realize the possibility of mobility, equality, and religious freedom in all the countries of our Mediterranean. As pastors, we've made ourselves a voice of the pain and suffering of our churches and our peoples. In the northeastern Mediterranean, at the conclusion of the 20th century, we lived to a greater or lesser extent what the Cardinal calls a winter of murder, destruction, and persecution. But he adds it's not spring either for North Africa and the Middle East, where the churches endure wounds and suffering in the form of violence, conflict, and divisions of all kinds, caused largely by wealthy countries.
e le persone con cui sono cresciuto.
Holy Father, says Cardinal Puljić, all of us are heartbroken by the departure of so many young people, a departure caused by war, injustice and poverty. Nevertheless, he says, we're comforted by those young people who do remain, showing extraordinary courage and great love for the country and the people with whom they grew up. We're also glad to see a large number of elderly people who deeply believe that the present and future are not primarily in the hands of the powerful of this world, but in the hands of God. As bishops of these countries, we are often among the strongest supporters of dialogue in terms of equality and love for the local people and the local church.
Internamente l'anima dell'uomo e delle chiese. Mi tornano alla memoria la parola.
During this meeting, we didn't speak much about the spirit of secularism and consumerism, which internally damages the soul of humanity and the churches.
Della guerra mi disse, non so se più.
Cardinal Puljić says he's reminded of the words of a cardinal from Western Europe who, during a visit to his city of Sarajevo, during the difficult days of the war, said to him, I don't know whether it's more difficult for you to see these churches demolished or for me to see churches sold, because many Catholics no longer feel the desire to pray.
E l'inverno come primavera. Siamo contenti che durante questa
The enemy, he says, constantly wants to represent the culture of death as a culture of life, and winter as spring.
Insieme modi di cooperazione e sostegno. Abbiamo bisogno di sentirci.
We are happy that during these days we have met hearts that are willing to listen, to think with us, and to seek together ways of cooperation and support.
Di più per costruire la pace, il dialogo e la cooperazione.
Cardinal Puljić says we need to feel accompanied and supported by those in power, to whom we ask to work harder to build peace, dialogue and cooperation. We feel the importance of being visited by other pastors in our churches and of helping us to find ways to accomplish our mission in this world.
Ma abbiamo comunità più grandi e più forti che sono pronte a difenderci e riconoscerci.
We rejoice every time someone visits our churches and our countries, showing everyone that we are not alone, but that we have larger and stronger communities that are ready to defend us and to recognize us in a relationship of communion and fraternity. Holy Father, I'd like to express our gratitude because you have come among us on this occasion. I thank you also for visiting many local churches in countries where, as Christians, we are less numerous. Thank you, Holy Father. We will gladly pray for you. That was the president of the Bishops' Conference of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Archbishop of Sarajevo, Cardinal Vinko Puljić, addressing Pope Francis.
Chiesto di presentarle in maniera molto breve quello che abbiamo fatto in questi 3 giorni. Sono stati 3 giorni di riflessione e preghiera molto belli e sono state anche una bella esperienza.
And this is Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa. He's the Apostolic Administrator Sedevacante of the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And he says that he's being asked by his brother bishops to summarize in a very brief way the works and conclusions of the past few days.
Ci siamo poi scambiati esperienze.
Most Holy Father, he says these 3 days of reflection and prayer were a beautiful experience of the Church, which brought us closer to each other in a more concrete way. We listened to one another, and most of all, we listened to the cry coming from the territories on the southern shore of what is known as the Mare Nostrum, our sea. It's an old Latin term for the Mediterranean. We exchanged experiences and proposals, and he gives various examples of being aware of what's happening on the shores of the Mediterranean, in Libya and elsewhere.
Hanno reso questo bacino centro di interessi enormi. Il destino di intere popolazioni e ha servito all'interesse di pochi.
We gave ourselves certain perspectives and aims, he says. The first was to listen. We wanted to listen to the reality of which we are part. For centuries, the Mediterranean has been at the center of cultural, commercial, and religious exchanges of all kinds.
Sono state funzionali a tale modello.
But it's also been the scene of wars, conflicts, and even political and religious divisions. In the present, instead of decreasing, all this seems to be increasing. We have commercial wars, energy wars, economic and social inequalities that have made the Mediterranean the center of huge interests. The fate of entire peoples is enslaved to the interests of a few, causing violence that is functional to development models created and supported largely by the West. In the past, it's enough to think of the colonial period. We've seen examples of this model. Today we want to ask forgiveness, in particular, for having delivered this wounded world to our young people. Our churches in North Africa and the Middle East are the ones paying the highest price. Decimated in numbers, we remain a small minority, but these churches are not renouncing their beliefs. On the contrary, they have rediscovered the essentials of the Christian faith and witness.
Ma innanzitutto di solidarietà, di sentirsi ascoltate, che qualcuno faccia propria la loro difficile realtà.
There are communities that in the face of enormous difficulties and even persecution have remained faithful to Christ. The way of the cross is proper to the experience of the Mediterranean churches. And Archbishop Pizzaballa says he's thinking in particular of the fate of thousands of migrants fleeing from situations of persecution and poverty who've changed the face of many of our churches. The churches of the Middle East and North Africa have repeatedly reaffirmed that they not only need economic aid, but first of all, they need solidarity. They need to feel listened to, that someone makes their difficult reality their own, where there's the light of the many witnesses of fidelity and human and Christian solidarity.
In questi giorni hanno detto che al dialogo preferiscono la convivialità, perché noi viviamo insieme. Attraverso il dialogo, ormai
the second point that Archbishop Pizzaballa brings out is their aim was to share experiences and proposals. And so they asked, what can we do as churches in the face of these challenges? If current models of development subject the human person to consumption and violence, our communities, he said, do not stop building alternative ways of peace, development, and growth, ways that are a witness to our Christian style of being within our realities, ways that place the person at the center, in schools, hospitals, and various initiatives of solidarity and closeness to the poor.
In un contesto spesso ricco di manipolazioni, le nostre chiese desiderano diventare un'unica.
Dialogue is the other form of expression in our church life, he said. Through ecumenical dialogue among the churches, we are committed to organizing common prayers for peace on a permanent basis, to establishing interreligious committees where they don't exist, especially with Muslim believers, carrying out works of solidarity, sharing together. We want to make fraternity and human solidarity grow and transform it into experience. This perspective also involves parousia, the frankness of denouncing the evil that causes poverty and creates structural situations of injustice. In a context often rich in manipulation, says Archbishop Pizzaballa, our churches want to become the one prophetic voice of truth and freedom. The third aim was creating perspectives. We insisted, he said, on strengthening initiatives of mutual knowledge, facilitating the twinning of dioceses and parishes, the exchange of priests, experiences of seminarians, and forms of volunteer work. Their motto, he says, was "Come and see." So far, perhaps, there's been much talk about the churches and their realities. Now we must move on to talking with the churches and their realities. Hospitality, he says, which is typical of Mediterranean culture, must begin, first of all, among us. In a complex and articulated reality like the Mediterranean one, we intend taking on its contradictions, learning and teaching to live it with Christian hope. We're only at the beginning of a long but definitely exciting journey, which is why we've decided to continue to meet permanently, so that little by little, in the times that the Lord will indicate, we can build a common path where a culture of peace and communion can grow in our wounded and torn contexts. And yes, that was Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa, Apostolic Administrator, Sede Vacante of the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem, summing up for the Holy Father a bit of the work of this meeting over the past 3 days. And now we listen to our Holy Father.
Partecipare a questo incontro che riunisce le chiese del Mediterraneo.
Dear brothers, I am pleased that we can meet you. I'm grateful that each of you has accepted the invitation of the Italian Bishops' Conference to participate in this meeting, which brings together the churches of the Mediterranean.
Con i capi delle chiese cristiane, ortodosse, cattoliche, qui a Bari.
The Pope is recalling the encounter with the heads of Christian churches and Orthodox churches here in Bari.
Messi, che se fa un gesto di unità così, quello era la prima volta dopo il grande scisma, che eravamo tutti.
He is referring to a previous visit to Bari in July 2018 when he met with leaders of Catholic and Orthodox Christians.
Io credo che potremmo chiamare Bari la capitale dell'unità.
He says we could call Bari the capital of unity. He asks permission to call Bari the capital of church unity. And he thanks everyone for their words of welcome.
Quando a suo tempo il Cardinal Bassetti mi presentò l'iniziativa, la colsi subito con
When Cardinal
gioia.
Bassetti presented the idea of coming here to me, I readily accepted it, says Pope Francis, seeing it as an opportunity to begin a process of listening and discussion aimed at helping to build peace in this crucial part of the world. For that reason, I wanted to be present and testify to the importance of the new model of fraternity and collegiality that you represent. He refers to that word that the bishops added to dialogue, conviviality. I find it significant that this meeting takes place in Bari, since this city is so important for its links with the Middle East and Africa. It's an eloquent sign of the deeply rooted relationships between different peoples and traditions.
Da sempre tiene vivo il dialogo ecumenico e interreligioso. adoperando
The Diocese of Bari has always fostered ecumenical and interreligious dialogue, working tirelessly to create bonds of mutual esteem and fraternity. It's no coincidence, he says, that I chose Bari a year and a half ago to meet leaders of Christian communities in the Middle East for an important moment of discussion and fellowship meant to help our sister churches to journey together and to feel closer to one another. You've come together in this particular context to reflect on the transmission of the faith and the promotion of peace. The Mare Nostrum is the physical and spiritual locus where our civilization took place, took shape as a result of the encounter of diverse peoples. By its very configuration, this sea forces surrounding peoples and cultures to constant interaction, to recall what they have in common. And to realize that only by living in concord can they enjoy the opportunities this region offers, thanks to its resources, its natural beauty, and its varied human traditions. In our own day, the importance of this area has not decreased in the wake of the process of globalization. On the contrary, globalization has highlighted the role of the Mediterranean as a crossroads of interests and important social, political, and economic currents. The Mediterranean remains a strategic region whose equilibrium has an impact on the other parts of the world. Pope Francis says the size of the Mediterranean could be said to be inversely proportional to its importance. To see it more as a lake than an ocean, as Giorgio Lapira once said. Defining it as the great Sea of Galilee, he drew an analogy between Jesus' time and our own, between his milieu and that of the peoples of our time. Just as Jesus lived and worked in a context of differing cultures and beliefs, so we find ourselves in a multifaceted environment, scarred by divisions and forms of inequality that lead to instability. Amid deep fault lines and economic, religious, confessional, and political conflicts, we are called to offer our witness to unity and peace, and we do so prompted by our faith and membership in the Church, seeking to understand the contribution that we, as disciples of our Lord, can make to all the men and women of the Mediterranean region. The transmission of the faith is necessarily enriched by the heritage of the Mediterranean region. That heritage has been fostered, preserved, and kept alive by Christian communities through catechesis and the celebration of the sacraments, the formation of consciences, and individual and communal hearing of the Lord's Word. Specifically, thanks to popular piety, the Christian experience has taken on a form both meaningful and enduring. Popular devotion is, for the most part, expressed in straightforward and authentic faith. And here the Pope says he wants to quote number 48 of Evangelii Nunziandi, where St. Paul changes the word religiosity to piety. That number should be
nel nostro
a guideline
annuncio del Vangelo.
in the way we announce and proclaim the gospel to
In
our
quest'area
people, says the
un
Pope.
deposito di enorme potenzialità e anche quello artistico
In this region,
unisce i contenuti della fede alla ricchezza
one
delle
deposit of
culture, alla
remarkable
bellezza delle
potential
opere d'arte.
is its art,
È un patrimonio
which combines
che attrae
the
continuamente
content of
milioni
the
di
faith
visitatori
with
da
cultural
tutto il
treasures
mondo.
and beautiful
Va
artworks.
custodito con cura, quale prezioso eredità
This
ricevuta
heritage continues to attract millions of visitors from
e da
every part of the world
consegnare alle generazioni future.
and must be carefully preserved as a precious legacy
Secondo
received
l'annuncio del
on
Vangelo,
loan
non può
to be handed on to
dissolversi
future
dall'impegno per il
generations.
bene comune e ci spinge ad agire come instancabili operatori di pace.
In the light of all this,
Oggi l'area
the
del
preaching of the gospel
Mediterraneo
cannot be
è
detached
insidiata
from
da
commitment to the
tanti
common good.
focolai di
It impels
instabilità
us
e di guerra,
to act tirelessly
sia nel Medio
as
Oriente,
peacemakers.
sia in vari stati del Nord Africa.
The Mediterranean region is
Oppure
currently
diverse
threatened by
etnie e
outbreaks of
gruppi
instability and
religiosi
conflict,
confessionali.
both in the Middle East and different countries of North Africa, as well as between various ethnic, religious, or confessional groups. Nor can we overlook the still unresolved conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, with the danger of inequitable solutions and hence a prelude to new crises. Wars, by allocating resources to the acquisition of weapons and military power, divert those resources from vital social needs, such as the support of families, healthcare and education. As St. John the 23rd teaches, it is contrary to reason. In other words, it is genuine madness. It is madness to destroy houses, bridges, factories, hospitals, to kill people and annihilate resources, instead of building human and economic relationships. It's a kind of folly to which we cannot resign ourselves.
La guerra potrà essere scambiata per normalità o accettata come via ineluttabile per regolare divergenze e interessi contrapposti.
War can never be considered normal or accepted as an inevitable means of settling differences and conflicts of interest.
Tanto che si può ribadire che non c'è alternativa alla pace per nessuno.
The ultimate goal of every human society is peace. Indeed, we can affirm once more that in spite of everything, there is no real alternative to peacemaking.
Abbruttisce chi colpisce e chi ne è colpito e rivela una concessione miope.
There is no reasonable alternative to peace because every attempt at exploitation or supremacy demeans both its author and its target. It shows a myopic grasp of reality, since it can offer no future to either of the two. War is thus the failure of every plan, human and divine. One need only visit a countryside or a city that has been a theater of war to realize how, as a result of hatred, a garden turns into a desolate and inhospitable landscape, how the earthly paradise turns into hell. I would like to add the sin of hypocrisy in the meetings and international conventions. So many countries talk about arms and then they sell weapons. They sell weapons to countries that are at war with one another. This is a great hypocrisy.
La costruzione della pace che la Chiesa e ogni istituzione civile devono sempre sentire come priorità.
Peace, which the Church and every civic institution must always consider their first priority, has justice as its indispensable condition. Justice is trampled underfoot when the needs of individuals are ignored, or where partisan economic interests prevail over the rights of individuals and communities. Moreover, justice is blocked by a throwaway culture that treats people as if they were things, generating and promoting inequality. So much so that on the shores of this very sea there are some societies of immense wealth and others in which many people struggle simply to survive. A decisive contribution to combating this culture is made by the countless charitable and educational works carried out by Christian communities. Whenever dioceses, parishes, associations, volunteer organizations, and volunteer work, he says, is one of the great treasures of the work of the Church in Italy. Whenever these strive to support those abandoned or in need, the gospel becomes all the more powerful and attractive. In the pursuit of the common good, another name for peace, we should employ the criteria pointed out by Lapida to let ourselves be guided by the expectations of the poor. This principle, which can never be set aside for calculation or convenience, if taken seriously, enables a radical anthropological shift that makes everyone more human. What use is a society of constant technological progress if it becomes increasingly indifferent to its members in need? In preaching the gospel, we hand on a way of thinking that respects each person by our unremitting effort to make the Church a sign of special care for the vulnerable and poor. For the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And if one member suffers, all suffer together.
Vi sono quanti fuggono dalla guerra o lasciano la loro terra in cerca di
In the Mediterranean region, these include all who are fleeing war or who have left their homelands in search of a humanly dignified life. The number of these brothers and sisters forced to abandon their loved ones and their lands and to face conditions of extreme insecurity has risen as a result of spreading conflicts and increasingly dramatic environmental and climatic conditions. It's easy to anticipate that this phenomenon, with its momentous developments, will have a profound effect on the Mediterranean, for which states and religious communities must not be found unprepared. While countries experiencing this flow of migrants and the countries to which they travel are affected by this, so too are the governments and churches of the migrants' countries of origin, which, with the departure of so many young people, witness the impoverishment of their own future. We are aware that in different social contexts, there's a growing attitude of indifference.
Che fa pensare all'atteggiamento stigmatizzato in molte parole evangeliche di quanti si credono.
An attitude of indifference and even rejection that reflects the mentality condemned in many of the gospel parables of those who, caught up in their own wealth and freedom, are blind to others, who by speaking out or by the very fact of their poverty are pleading for help. Fear is leading to a sense that we need to defend ourselves against what is depicted in demagogic terms as an invasion. The rhetoric of the clash of civilizations merely serves to justify violence and to nurture hatred. The failure or in any case, the weakness of politics and factionalism are leading to forms of radicalism and terrorism. The international community has been content with military interventions, whereas it should have built institutions that can guarantee equal opportunities and enable citizens to assume their responsibility for the common good.
Alziamo la voce per chiedere ai governi la tutela delle minoranze e della libertà religiosa.
For our part, brothers, let us speak out to demand that government leaders protect minorities and religious freedom.
Comunità cristiane è una ferita che lacera
Persecution experienced above all, but not only, by Christian communities is a heart-rending fact that cannot leave us indifferent. In the meantime, we can never resign ourselves to the fact that someone who seeks hope by way of the sea can die without receiving help, or that someone from afar can fall prey to sexual exploitation, be underpaid, or recruited by gangs. To be sure, acceptance and a dignified integration are stages in a process that's not easy.
A me fa paura quando ascolto qualche discorso,
I feel afraid when I hear
alcuni leader delle nuove forme di populismo.
certain leaders of the new forms of populism.
Discorsi seminavano paura e poi odio
Speeches that seminate fear and hatred.
nella decada del 30 del secolo scorso.
They remind me of similar discourses in the first half of the last century.
Questo processo di accoglienza e dignitosa integrazione è impensabile, ho detto, poterlo affrontare innalzando i muri. In tale
It's
modo,
unthinkable, says the Pope, that we can address this problem
l'accesso alla ricchezza
by putting up
cui l'altro
walls.
è portatore e che costruisce sempre uno
In so doing, we cut ourselves off
si rinnega il desiderio di comunione iscritto
from
nel
the
cuore
richness
dell'uomo
brought by others,
e nella storia dei popoli si contrasta il processo di unificazione.
which always represents an opportunity for growth.
Già si fa strada tra mille avversità. Settimana scorsa un artista
Last week, an artist
torinese
from Turin
mi ha inviato
sent me
un dipinto
A painting.
fatto con la tecnica del bruciato sopra il legno,
the technique
la
of
fuga in Egitto. E c'era
burnt
un San Giuseppe
charcoal over wood,
non così tranquillo come siamo abituati a vederlo nelle immaginette,
it was an image that we're not used to seeing in others.
con l'atteggiamento di un rifugiato siriano.
It was the image of a
Bambino,
Syrian refugee,
il dolore, vedere, no? Non addolcire,
not
ma
a sweetening of the
stesso
image,
bambino quando
but
dovette
one that
fuggire
communicates the
di
pain.
lo stesso che sta succedendo oggi. Il Mediterraneo ha una vocazione peculiare in tal senso. È il mare
The Mediterranean has a unique vocation in this regard.
culturalmente sempre aperto all'incontro, al dialogo
It's
e
the
alla
sea of
reciproca
intermingling,
integrazione.
culturally always open to encounter,
Delle radici
dialogue, and mutual inculturation.
non hanno futuro. Il messaggio del meticciato ci dice tanto. Essere affacciati sul Mediterraneo rappresenta dunque una
To be part of the Mediterranean region
Noi lasciamo che a causa di
is a
uno
source
spirito
of
nazionalistico
extraordinary
si
potential
diffonda la persuasione contraria.
that does not allow a spirit of nationalism to spread the opposite view,
Meno raggiungibili,
namely that those states less
geograficamente più
accessible
isolati,
and geographically more isolated should be privileged. Dialogue alone enables us to come together, to overcome prejudice and stereotypes, to tell our stories and to come to know ourselves better. Young people too represent a special opportunity. When they are provided the resources and possibilities they need to take charge of their own future, they show they're capable of generating a promising and hope-filled future. This will only happen as the result of an acceptance that is not superficial, but heartfelt and benevolent and practiced by everyone at all levels, both the everyday level of interpersonal relationships and the political and institutional levels, and fostered by those who shape culture and bear greater responsibility in the area of public opinion. For those who believe in the gospel, dialogue is advantageous not only from an anthropological, but also from a theological standpoint. Listening to our brothers and sisters is not only an act of charity, but also a way of listening to the Spirit of God, who surely works in others and whose voice transcends the limits in which we are often tempted to constrain the truth. Let us come to know the value of hospitality, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares, says the letter to the Hebrews.
L'insegnamento biblico. Può essere elaborata solo se ci si sforza in ogni modo di fare il primo passo e non si escludono i segni.
We need to develop a theology of acceptance and of dialogue, leading to a renewed understanding and proclamation of the teaching of Scripture. This can only happen if we make every effort to take the first step and not exclude the seeds of truth possessed by others too. In this way, the discussion of our various religious convictions can concern not only the truths we believe, but also specific themes that can become defining points of our teaching as a whole. All too often, history has known conflicts and struggles based on the distorted notion that we're defending God by opposing anyone who does not share our set of beliefs. Indeed, extremism and fundamentalism deny the dignity of the human person and his or her religious freedom, and thus lead to moral decline and the spread of an antagonistic view of human relationships. This too shows us the urgent need of a more vital encounter between different religious confessions, one motivated by sincere respect and a desire for peace. This encounter is spurred by the awareness set forth in the document on human fraternity, signed at Abu Dhabi, that the authentic teachings of religions invite us to remain rooted in the values of peace, to defend the values of mutual understanding, human fraternity, and harmonious coexistence. Religious groups and different communities can cooperate more actively in helping the poor and welcoming immigrants in such a way that our relationships are motivated by common goals and accompanied by active commitment.
Per costruire la pace e praticare l'accoglienza non potranno più combattersi.
Those who together dirty their hands in building peace and fraternal acceptance will no longer be able to fight over matters of faith.
Della solidarietà reciproca, della ricerca dell'umiltà.
But will pursue the paths of respectful discussion, mutual solidarity,
quello che ho sentito
and the quest for unity.
quando sono andato a Lampedusa,
It's that what I felt when I went to Lampedusa,
quell'area di indifferenza.
that air of indifference.
Nell'isola c'era accoglienza,
There was welcome in the island,
poi nel mondo la cultura
but in the world,
dell'indifferenza.
the culture of indifference.
Questi sono gli auspici che desidero comunicarvi, cari confratelli.
These are the hopes I wanted to share with you, dear brothers,
Consolante incontro di questi giorni.
at the conclusion of our fruitful and consoling encounter in these days.
Per primo ha solcato il Mediterraneo, affrontando pericoli.
I entrust you to the intercession of the Apostle Paul, who was the first to cross the Mediterranean, facing dangers and hardships of every kind in order to bring the gospel of Christ to everyone. May his example show you the paths to pursue in the joyful and liberating task of handing on the faith in our own time. I leave you with the words of the prophet Isaiah in the hope that they will provide you and your respective communities with hope and strength. Witnessing the destruction of Jerusalem after the exile, the prophet didn't fail to look forward to a future of peace and prosperity. Isaiah writes, "They shall build up the ancient ruins, they shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations." This is the work the Lord entrusts to you on behalf of this beloved Mediterranean region, to restore relationships that have been broken, to rebuild cities destroyed by violence, to make a garden flourish in what is now a desert, to instill hope in the hopeless, and to encourage those caught up in themselves not to fear their brothers and sisters.
Divenuto cimitero come un posto di futura resurrezione di tutta l'area.
And to allow that this Mediterranean Sea that's become a cemetery to be a sign of resurrection. May the Lord accompany your steps and bless your work of reconciliation and peace. Pope Francis addressing the bishops of the Mediterranean region here in the southern Italian city of Bari.
Santo Padre, i miei confratelli vescovi mi danno la grande gioia di ringraziarla a loro nome. Grazie di essere venuto a condividere con noi.
And it's left to Archbishop Paul Defarge of Algiers, the president of the Regional Bishops' Conference of North Africa, to express the gratitude of all the bishops to the Holy Father. In fact, he says, "My fellow bishops give me the great joy of thanking you in their name, thanking you for coming to share with us this last day of our meeting, so well prepared by our confreres of the Italian Bishops' Conference." Around the Mediterranean Sea, says Archbishop Defarge, our churches and our people face great challenges, which are those of our world today. The challenge of welcoming migrants, the challenge of interreligious dialogue, the challenge of ecology. The Mediterranean, which throughout its history has been a place of exchange between cultures and civilizations, will either preserve its vocation to be a sea of peace, or it will be the cemetery of our waste and closure. Holy Father, says Archbishop Defarge, your words and gestures, which are so often prophetic, concerning these three challenges, shake our churches and urge them to be more and more at the service of kinship among all, with special attention to the most vulnerable and the weakest. There is no future in self-closure and in nationalistic retreats. These days are for our churches an assistance, a help to live among themselves and within themselves in openness and welcome, to be witnesses of the joy of the Beatitudes. Holy Father, with my brother bishops, I'm deeply grateful for your ministry as universal pastor. Throughout the world, even in the Maghreb region, from which I come, with its Muslim majority, your words and gestures are heard. People tell us, this Pope loves us. This Pope loves us. Yes, Holy Father. Your word communicates because it is filled with humanity. You help us to be, like you, not only servants of our communities, but servants of all the inhabitants of our Mediterranean. Christians, Muslims, Jews, all men and women of goodwill, all those who seek significance and meaning. If your gestures and words sometimes arouse resistance, much more often they instill great hope. Thank you for trusting our churches, for having faith in our churches. We saw this in your message on the occasion of the beatification of the martyrs of Algeria and your visit to Morocco. Thank you again, Holy Father. May the Lord keep you in fidelity to the service of unity and peace. We pray for you that you may continue to lead the Church on the path of witnessing to the joy of the gospel for a long time to come. Archbishop Paul Defarge, Archbishop of Algiers and President of the Regional Episcopal Conference of North Africa, expressing the gratitude of all the bishops to Pope Francis. A reminder that you are listening to Vatican Radio, Vatican Media, our live broadcast coming to you from the southern Italian city of Bari, where Pope Francis has just addressed a meeting of bishops from countries, from 19 countries, in fact, bordering the Mediterranean Sea, some 50 bishops, at the conclusion of a 3-day meeting entitled Mediterranean Frontier of Peace. Later this morning, Pope Francis will be celebrating Holy Mass in the Basilica of Saint Nicholas. Bari, of course, is home to the relics of Saint Nicholas, who is venerated by both the Catholic and Orthodox churches. It's a place that has particular significance for Pope Francis. In fact, he was here in July 2018, as he mentioned in his address, when he met with leaders of Catholic and Orthodox Christians and with whom he reflected on the Middle Eastern origins of the Christian tradition and on the commitment religious leaders need to undertake in order to walk and pray and work together. At that time, he said, in the hope that the art of encounter would prevail over strategies of conflict. A few moments ago, Pope Francis described Bari as a city of unity. Again, later this morning, he will be venerating the relics of Saint Nicholas. He'll be meeting with the community of Dominican priests who are in charge of the basilica, and then be celebrating a Holy Mass in the city centre. We'll be providing a live radio commentary of that Mass. We do hope you can join us. Today is the 7th Sunday of the year, and the Mass will be celebrated according to the reflecting and respecting those liturgical readings.
Dopo che il Papa aveva finito tutte queste questioni va su Cristo per venerare le reliquie e poi va fuori per salutare le persone lì, perciò rimaniamo in onda, mi dispiace.
The Pope is now greeting his brother bishops and cardinals, and afterwards he will be going downstairs to the crypt to venerate the relics of Saint Nicholas, as we said, and then proceeding to the outside of the Basilica, where, of course, the population of Bari has gathered in the hopes of catching a glimpse of him, before proceeding to the area of the city where he'll be celebrating Mass. Bari, as we said, was the setting for a meeting with the patriarchs of the Middle East, Orthodox and Catholics, back in 2018, when he said that he hoped that the art of encounter would prevail over the strategies of conflict, and certainly those were themes that he repeated in his very wide-ranging discourse. If you didn't have an opportunity to hear it live, then please know that it will be available. Certainly a report and an abridged version of the same will be available on our website shortly. That's on our Vatican News website, vaticannews.va. Pope Francis was very specific in picking up on the themes discussed by the bishops during this meeting, the agenda on the Mediterranean as a frontier of peace meeting that they've been holding for the last 3 days. He picked up on the issues discussed by the bishops, regional issues regarding migration, first of all, poverty, inequality, the evangelization of young people, unemployment, cultural exchanges, and, of course, peace efforts. War, he said, by allocating resources to the acquisition of weapons and military power, diverts resources from vital social needs, such as the support of families, healthcare, and education. The Pope actually went off script round about that point when he spoke of hypocrisy. He spoke of the hypocrisy of nations that talk about disarmament and then end up selling weapons to countries that are at war with one another. In his discourse to the bishops, Pope Francis quoted Saint Pope John XXIII, who wrote in Pacem in Terris how war is contrary to reason. It's a genuine madness, he called it, a kind of folly to which we cannot resign ourselves. War is madness that's madness to destroy houses, bridges, factories, hospitals, to kill people and annihilate resources instead of building human and economic relationships. We can never consider war normal, said the Pope, or accept it as an inevitable means of settling differences and conflicts of interest. Pope Francis also spoke about the pursuit of the common good. He called that another name for peace. If you were listening to the discourse, you would have heard him mention Giorgio Lapira on various occasions. Giorgio Lapira died in 1977. He was twice mayor of Florence, and he was one of those who drew up the Italian constitution. And since this meeting has been organized by the Italian Bishops' Conference, Giorgio Lapira is often quoted, referred to, especially some of his writings in what he called his Social Chronicles, written in 1950, where he said we need to allow ourselves to be guided by the expectations of the poor. Pope Francis quoted this, in fact, in his discourse, saying this principle can never be set aside, being justified by convenience. We need to take it seriously because it enables what the Pope called a radical anthropological shift that makes everyone more human. What's use is a society of constant technological progress, said the Pope, if it becomes increasingly indifferent to its members in need. In preaching the gospel, we hand on a way of thinking that respects each person by our unremitting effort to make the Church a sign of special care for the vulnerable and the weakest. Yes, and a reminder that you are tuned to Vatican Radio, Vatican Media, and we are coming to you live from the Pontifical Basilica of Saint Nicholas in Bari, southern Italy. The fact that this event is taking place here at all is extremely significant. It's significant for Roman Catholics, for Orthodox Christians, and for many others. It's a destination for hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who come here from all over the world. If you're not familiar with the Basilica, let me give you some details. It dates back to the 12th century, to the 11th, somewhere between the 11th and 12th centuries, which is part of the era where that part of Italy, southern Italy, was dominated by the Normans, the Italo-Normans. The area was previously occupied by the Byzantines, and Bari was the main city. And so the foundation of the Basilica, which remember the Pope, after meeting all the bishops, is going to go down into the crypt to venerate the relics of St. Nicholas. The foundation is related to the recovery of these relics of the saint from his original shrine in Myra, which is in present-day Turkey. As often happened during that era, 11th, 12th century, when Myra passed into the hands of the Saracens, the saint's relics were retrieved and brought across the sea to Bari. According to legend, the saint had passed by the city on his way to Rome and had asked for Bari to be his burial place. There was some competition because both Venice and in the north and Bari in the south wanted to claim the saint's relics. Saint Nicholas was already extremely popular at that time, and Bari won out. So that's why they're here today. They were brought here in 1087, and a brand new church was built to shelter Saint Nicholas's remains. Apparently Pope Urban II himself came to be present at the consecration of the crypt in 1089. The church as an architectural structure is rather square in shape. It actually looks more than a castle, like a castle, than a church, which has a lot to do with the era, of course, in which it was built, in an era in which protection was the priority. There are two massive towers that frame the facade, and it was probably used, in fact, as a castle down through the centuries, because it's over around 1,000 years old. The structure is a typical basilica style, a nave with two side aisles. Again, if you're able to see, if you're watching this event, then you can see what this basilica style looks like. The nave and the aisles, very unadorned, unlike the later Renaissance or Baroque churches with all their gorgeous frescoes and paintings. Very similar granite columns and pilasters, almost grey in its in the colouring, and the steps leading down into the crypt where the remains of St. Nicholas are kept. The basilica does house one of the most important Romanesque sculptural works in southern Italy, a bishop's throne, which dates back to the late 11th century, and there are precious mosaic pavements in the crypt and in the presbytery. The church was restored in the late 13th century and again in the 14th and 17th and 20th century. Most of the Baroque additions were removed, leaving just trying to restore it to its original, very simple style, although there are some paintings, as we said, and mosaics and so forth in the crypt, which is where Pope Francis is headed right now. December 6th, by the way, is St. Nicholas's feast day. If there are any Nicholases or Nicolas out there listening or watching, then you probably know that already. If you don't, then mark it on your calendar to greet any Nicholases or Nicolas or Nickies whom you may know. December 6th is their feast day. It's traditional for clergy of this basilica to lower a flask into the tomb underground of St. Nicholas, which you're seeing here, to extract some of the myrrh, which is believed to exude from these relics. And containers of this myrrh, remember, myrrh was one of the gifts of the three kings at the Nativity of Jesus: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And containers of this are sent all over the world. Various miracles have been reported as a result of being anointed with this myrrh. There are two celebrations, in fact. If your feast day does not fall on December 6th, then it falls on December 19th, according to the Gregorian calendar. So St. Nicholas is celebrated twice. One according to the new calendar, which is December 6th, and one according to the old calendar, which is December 19th. And both of these days are celebrated with great festivities here in the city of Bari. A reminder that you are tuned to our live broadcast. Pope Francis is venerating the relics of St. Nicholas in the crypt of the basilica at this very moment. We just heard him address his fellow bishops after their three-day meeting on the theme Mediterranean Frontier of Peace. But remember, this is not the first time the Pope has been here as Pope. He came here in July 2018, just 2 years ago, and on that occasion he asked for the Middle East to be, and I quote, "May the Middle East be an ark of peace, not war." The Pope had been meeting with leaders of Catholic and Orthodox Christians, and he invited them to pray for peace in the Middle East. He reflected on that occasion on the Christian traditions and origins in the Middle East, and he called for commitment by religious leaders to walk together, to pray together, and to work together in the hope that the art of encounter will prevail over strategies of conflict. Looking at that speech from July 2018, I see the Pope began recalling the Middle Eastern origins of Jesus and Christianity. Instead of using weapons, he said, Jesus asked his disciples to put them away. A renewed conversion to the gospel is the only means by which to confront the agony that the Middle East lives daily. In imitation of Jesus, our response cannot be flight or the sword that will lead to the radiant dawn of Easter. Like Jesus, our response must be the gift of self. Gospel conversion invites us to find our safety and consolation in Jesus alone, said Pope Francis then, and to make him known. It is peace that needs to be cultivated in the parched soil of conflict and discord. There's no alternative to this, said Pope Francis. Listening and dialogue lead to peace. And the Holy Father rather echoed those sentiments and those messages when he spoke to his brother bishops here in Bari just a few moments ago. He spoke of the importance of the Mediterranean and the contribution of the churches of this area. He said it was significant the meeting was taking place here in Bari, since this city is so important for its links with the Middle East and Africa. It's an eloquent sign, he said, of the deeply rooted relationship between different peoples and nations. The Pope praised the bishops for coming together in this particular context to reflect, as they have been doing over the last few days, on the vocation and the future of the Mediterranean, on the transmission of the faith and the promotion of peace. He spoke of the Mediterranean as the physical and spiritual center where our civilization took place as a result of an encounter of diverse peoples. By its very configuration, the Pope described the Mediterranean as forcing surrounding peoples and cultures to constantly interact, and therefore to recall what they have in common and to realize that it's only by living in peace that they can enjoy the opportunities this region offers, thanks to its resources, its natural beauty, and its varied human traditions. In our own day, said the Pope, the importance of this area hasn't decreased in the process, in the wake of globalization. On the contrary, it's highlighted the role of the Mediterranean as a crossroads of interests and important social, political, religious, and economic currents. The Mediterranean remains a strategic region whose equilibrium has an impact on other parts of the world, and that's why the bishops have been meeting here to discuss various issues, including migration, refugees, young people, unemployment, and so on. In fact, each day, over the last few days, has had its own theme dedicated to a specific issue. The bishops began meeting here last Wednesday. The sessions began on Wednesday, and which is when the participants gathered for the opening of the conference. On Thursday, they discussed delivering the faith to future generations, so evangelization, young people, their expectations, needs, and challenges. And on Friday, the theme was very wide-ranging. It was the relationship between church and society, mobility, citizenship, religious freedom, inequality. On Saturday, yesterday, they had their final conclusions, which were condensed into a final document. We heard Archbishop Pizzaballa, Archbishop Pizzaballa is the Apostolic Administrator, sede vacante of the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. We heard him sum up some of those conclusions, which will enter the final document, which will be presented to Pope Francis. He said that they identified 3 aims and perspectives for these 3 days of reflection and prayer, which included listening, sharing experiences, and defining perspectives and proposals. We insisted on strengthening initiatives of mutual knowledge, he said, facilitating the twinning of dioceses and parishes, the exchange of religious, the experiences of seminarians, working together in volunteer initiatives, and chose the motto, "Come and see." There's been a lot of talk about the churches and their realities, said Archbishop Pizzaballa when he addressed the Pope. Now it's time to move on and to talk with the churches and their realities. Hospitality was another theme. Hospitality is typical of Mediterranean culture, and he said it must begin amongst ourselves as bishops, in this complex and articulated reality, such as the Mediterranean. We need to take on its contradictions, learning and teaching, living these contradictions with Christian hope. These are the words of Archbishop Pierbattista Pizzaballa when he addressed Pope Francis in the name of his brother bishops and was called upon to sum up the conclusions or some of the conclusions of their three-day meeting. He said that this was the beginning of a long but exciting journey, which is why the bishops have also decided to continue to meet permanently, so that little by little they can build a common path where a culture of peace and communion can grow in what he called our wounded and torn contexts. Our churches in North Africa and the Middle East, he said, often pay the highest price for the conflicts and divisions that are present in this part of the world. Many of these churches have been decimated in their numbers. They remain a small minority, but they've never announced their commitment to their Christian faith and witness. They're communities that face enormous difficulties, sometimes even persecution, but they have remained faithful. The way of the cross, he says, is proper to the experience of the Mediterranean churches. And the theme of migrants, the theme of migration, people crossing the Mediterranean or coming in from the Middle East, was central to all of the discourses of the bishops who addressed Pope Francis and Pope Francis himself. The question of migrants fleeing from situations of persecution and poverty, these have often changed the face of our churches. The churches of the Middle East and North Africa have repeatedly reaffirmed they need not just economic aid, but first and foremost they need what Archbishop Pizzaballa called solidarity. They feel they need to be listened to. They need somewhat individuals and governments to take on their difficult realities as their own. And so the bishops have been asking what they can do as churches in the face of all of this. Finding alternative ways to promote peace, development, and growth, ways that witness to our specifically Christian style of being within the Mediterranean reality. Finding new ways that place the human person at the center. This is something the Pope always reminds us. The Church is constantly reminding us of the need to place the human person at the center, whether it be in schools, hospitals, countless initiatives of solidarity and closeness to the poor. And one of the key words that comes through is dialogue. Dialogue being the other form of expression of our church life. Through ecumenical dialogue among the churches, we are committed to organizing common prayer for peace on a permanent basis. This is what Archbishop Pizzaballa said to the Pope in terms of the conclusions of the bishops' encounter, establishing interreligious committees where they don't already exist, especially with Muslim believers, carrying out works of solidarity and sharing together. With regard to relationships with Muslim communities, we also heard from the Archbishop of Algiers, president of the Regional Bishops' Conference for North Africa, Archbishop Paul Defarge. He addressed Pope Francis too and spoke of his reality coming from the Maghreb region, North Africa, from an area with a Muslim majority. He reminded Pope Francis how his gestures and words are heard in this area. People in this area tell us, he said, that they are aware that the Pope loves them because his word is so filled with humanity. He said that through his words, gestures, and examples, the Pope helps them as bishops to be not only servants of their own communities, but servants of all the inhabitants of the Mediterranean, Christian, Muslim, Jews, all men and women of goodwill, all those who seek meaning.
Ci hanno detto che il Papa veramente farà un saluto fuori dalla cattedrale, saranno poche parole di abbraccio. Mi dispiace tanto.
If you have the opportunity to be watching the images inside the basilica, you will see these jewels of 12th and 11th century art and architecture, the coffered ceiling, the marble works, the very strong Byzantine style. I don't know whether you got to see the brief visit of the Pope down to the tomb of Saint Nicholas of Bari, which he had a chance to venerate. There's not just the tomb of Saint Nicholas down there, there's also a Renaissance tomb of a Queen of Poland, Bona Sforza, which dates back to the 16th century. And the museum of the Basilica right next door contains various valuable works of art, including a collection of 12th century candelabra donated by King Charles I. There you're seeing this gorgeous coffered ceiling with its paintings and gilt and gold work. The church also contains the ciborium, its 4 columns and foliage and mythological figures. It contains the bishop's throne dating back to the 11th century, and it was originally connected to a monastery, the nearby monastery of St. Benedict, and the cathedra of the abbot Elias still stands in this church. Bari, one of the reasons why it is so famous and such a popular place for pilgrims, and again not only Christian pilgrims from all over the world, is because it is the place where his relics are preserved, and there was some discussion between Venice and Bari as to who would get those relics, but the people of Bari managed to carry them off under the noses of their Greek custodians way back in 1087 and place them here in this church, which, again, if you're seeing the images, is rather austere and in some senses almost looks more like a castle than a place of religious worship. And in fact, it was used in the Middle Ages as a castle, as a place of safety. How many people sought sanctuary literally in this place under so many invasions that historically took place in this part of Italy. War and peace have been central to the theme of Pope Francis' discourses, both in 2018 when he was last here and this morning. Peace, said the Pope this morning, which the Church and every civic institution must always consider their priority. Their first priority has justice as its indispensable condition. Justice, said the Pope, is trampled underfoot when the needs of individuals are ignored and where partisan economic interests prevail over the rights of individuals and communities. Justice, he said, is blocked by a throwaway culture that treats people as if they were things, generating and promoting inequality. So much so, said the Pope, that on the shores of this Mediterranean Sea there are some societies of immense wealth and others in which many people struggle simply to survive. A decisive contribution to combating this culture is made by the countless charitable and educational works carried out by Christian communities. Whenever dioceses, parishes or associations or volunteer organizations or individuals strive to support those abandoned or in need, the gospel becomes all the more powerful and attractive. And here the Pope, particularly, he went off script to thank the Italian Bishops' Conference and the Church in Italy for the great volunteer initiatives that it undertakes and carries forward in supporting people who are most vulnerable and most in need. Pope Francis also praised this area in terms of its artistic heritage. He called it a region that has remarkable potential in terms of its artworks, combining the content of the faith with cultural treasures and beautiful art. This heritage, he said, continues to attract millions of visitors from every part of the world and must be carefully preserved as a precious legacy received on loan. That was what the Pope said. We receive these treasures of the past only on loan because we need to ensure they're handed on to future generations. Pope Francis also spoke in his discourse to the bishops about evangelization. The proclamation of the gospel, he said, cannot be detached from commitment to the common good. It impels us to act tirelessly as peacemakers. The Mediterranean region is threatened, said Pope Francis, by outbreaks of instability and conflict, both in the Middle East and different countries of North Africa, as well as between various ethnic, religious or confessional groups. But we cannot overlook, said the Pope, unresolved conflicts between Israelis and Palestinians, with the dangers of inequitable solutions and hence a prelude to possible new crises. We're still here with you, coming to you live from the southern Italian city of Bari. Our live radio commentary here brought to you by Vatican Radio and Vatican Media. A reminder to you all that you can hear this commentary, you can follow the event on our Vatican News portal, which you can access at www.vaticannews.va. That's Vatican News with 2 N's, .va for Vatican. I know that we have friends of Salt and Light TV, EWTN TV, Shalom World TV, and Catholic TV. You're all joining us at this time, and we're linked up with various local radio stations around the world. Shortly on our Vatican News portal, you should be able to see the summary of Pope Francis' discourse, the discourse that he gave to the bishops who've been meeting here in Bari over the last few days since February 19th, a meeting organized and sponsored by the Italian Bishops' Conference and entitled Mediterranean Frontier of Peace. It's a meeting that brought together over 50 bishops from 19 Mediterranean nations in Europe, North America, and the Middle East. Migration has been one of the issues at the heart of the conference, as well as evangelization, young people, unemployment, cultural exchanges, and of course, peacemaking. All of those topics were touched on by Pope Francis in his speech to the bishops. A speech that was followed by a visit to the crypt of the Basilica of Saint Nicholas, where he venerated the relics of the saints, of the saint. He is right now talking to the community of Dominican fathers who are in charge of this church. It's expected that he will come out from the Basilica in a few moments and say a few words to the people of Bari who have gathered here in the hope of catching a glimpse of him, seeing him, and hearing what he has to say. And then the Pope will be celebrating Holy Mass in the city centre. We do have a live radio commentary of that event prepared for you, so we hope that you will be able to come back and join us for that Mass, and after which the Pope will return to the Vatican. He's expected to go back sometime after lunchtime today. It's not the Pope's first visit to Bari. He was here in July 2018 when he met with leaders of Catholic and Orthodox Christians, and on that occasion he reflected on the Middle Eastern origins of the Christian tradition and on the commitment of religious leaders to walk, pray and work together. On that occasion, the Pope also met with the people of Bari outside the Basilica of Saint Nicholas. Back then, he invited them to pray for peace in the Middle East. If the Pope does have a message for the people of Bari and for us here today, then it will be curious to hear whether it's the same. The Mass will be followed by the Angelus around midday, and again, as we always do, we will be broadcasting that live as well. Of course, Pope St. John Paul II also visited Bari, several, yes, in the last century, we tend to say it now. The Archbishop of Bari, who addressed the Pope earlier this morning, Archbishop Cacucci, whom will be speaking to the Pope later at the end of the Mass also today, gave an interview ahead of the Pope's visit to Bari, and he recalled that visit of St. John Paul II to the city and said that St. John Paul II back then had said how important it was. He'd stressed the importance of looking to the Mediterranean and to Africa, and how the city of Bari truly is a bridge between the shores of the great Mediterranean Sea, in particular between East and West, and how St. Nicholas himself is a bridge between East and West and brings together the churches and nations of the Mediterranean. In fact, St. Nicholas is venerated by Catholic and Orthodox Christianity and has a very special significance for Pope Francis as well. You may remember that in 2017, Pope Francis lent the relics of St. Nicholas to the Russian Orthodox Church, and allowing Orthodox faithful to reverence the relics of the saints, to venerate the relics of the saints in Moscow, which is exactly what happened. So if everything has significance, if everything has value, symbolic value, then the fact of being here, the fact of recalling the role of St. Nicholas and Bari in terms of ecumenical dialogue as well, all of these have significance and importance here today. This meeting here in Bari has been much looked forward to, and has been, the Italian Bishops' Conference has been preparing for it for ages. Various people have been interviewed and in terms of what the expectations were and what the significance of the meeting was. Recently, in an interview with Vatican Radio, the Custos of the Holy Land, highlighted the necessity of tailoring the task of transmitting the faith to suiting the characters of the diverse peoples and religions who live in the Mediterranean region. The Custos is a Franciscan. As you may know, the Franciscans have charge of the holy places in the Holy Land, and the present Custos is Father Francesco Patton. He was interviewed by Vatican Radio ahead of this meeting today in Bari. And during that interview, he spoke about the situation in the Holy Land right now, noting the differences of the situation with the rest of Europe. He emphasized the place of the family as the primary milieu for transmitting the faith because of the strong religious culture that the family inculcates in our children. The Christian families and the families of the Middle East and the Holy Land, said Father Patton, are strongly rooted in their religious traditions. They know if they are Christian, Muslim, or Hebrew. For the Latin community, Father Patton proposed the use of catechesis in parishes. Parishes, he said, are so important. They have such an important role in handing on the faith and teaching the faith in catechesis. All the Latin parishes in the Holy Land prepare children for the sacraments and encourage youth initiatives that will engage and involve young people. In the case of the Oriental churches, the emphasis on the liturgy serves as another fertile ground for transmitting the faith. For the Oriental churches, he said, liturgy is the formation for all Christian life. In terms of the uniqueness of the Holy Land, Father Patton, whom, as I said, is the Custos, Franciscan Custos of the Holy Land, in terms of its uniqueness, he said it presents the younger generation with the special resource of being able to visit the same holy places they read about in the Bible. What a great privilege to be able to be so close, to be able to see, touch, and visit the holy places that we read about in the Bible and in the Bible stories and in the Gospels. We can read and teach our faith, he says, in places that are connected with the Gospels. For example, we can read the Gospel of the Annunciation in Nazareth. We can read the Nativity narrative in Bethlehem and in Galilee and all the pages of the Gospel in which we see Jesus preaching and healing. I'm sure many of you who are listening right now have